Welcome back to the Private Parts of Wellness. I am Jessica Podonsky, a double board certified family nurse practitioner and menopause provider with the Menopause Society. This podcast is all about diving into the messy, complicated, and sometimes taboo parts of health and wellness, the things people whisper about but don't openly discuss. Because wellness isn't about just green smoothies and rock hard bodies. It's about our relationship with ourselves, our minds, and the stories we tell ourselves. So usually I don't do seasons, but this is going to be season 2025, and it could last for 12 months, and it also could last for less or even for years. I don't do seasons because it's just an extra step, but I appreciate you sticking with me and listening for what has been 30 plus episodes. And before we dive into the latest series, which is going to be about the senses, we're going to talk about the sense of smell, the sense of touch, taste, hearing. And we'll also talk about relationships. So there may be some breaks, but I promise we're going to talk about all the senses and maybe even the sixth sense. But today I want to talk about, or for this first episode of 2025, I want to talk about what's going on. So I think it's becoming evident for even those folks who were thinking that the direction of the United States was the right direction. And then there are those of us who are thinking that it was always wrong. It's very complicated, but I decided to use ChatGPT, and I put in a question for ChatGPT to kind of fight what I am hearing on the news, on Instagram, on just all the shit that seems to be coming down. So anyway, this was my question, and I thought I would read the story to you. It is unedited. This is what ChatGPT came up with. I also want to tell you that I remember listening to, maybe it was Yuval Harari, I don't know if I'm saying his name right, please forgive me, or somebody else who was talking about AI and what we can do as far as feeding AI, I want to say compassion. That's not really the right word, but you get the idea. So this was my question or my statement. Predict a global good outcome, one that could happen. Right now, it seems that America is falling into fascism and evil, regression into times of violence. Please write a story of prediction where equity for all people and the earth itself is preserved and humans exist, and while flawed, have an understanding that we are all cousins, part of the human race. Universe is conspiring for good, and world leaders are replaced with thoughtful, kind leaders that we look up to. So here's the story that ChatGPT came up with. The Great Turning, a story of equity and renewal. The year is 2050. The world has endured decades of turbulence, climate disasters, economic collapses, and the rise and fall of authoritarian regimes. Yet, against all odds, something remarkable has happened. Humanity has chosen a new path, a path rooted in equity, understanding, and care for one another and the planet. It began with the Great Reckoning of 2030, a year when ecosystems on every continent reached their breaking point. Rivers ran dry, Once fertile lands turned barren, and wildfires raged unchecked. Nations were forced to confront the consequences of centuries of exploitation. But what might have been humanity's undoing became the seed of its rebirth, the spark of change. In the midst of crisis, people turned to one another. Grassroots movements, long ignored, became the epicenter of transformation. Indigenous leaders from across the globe came together in an unprecedented summit, offering a vision of governance rooted in stewardship, reciprocity, and humility. Their message was simple: we are all relatives, cousins in the great family of life. This message spread like wildfire, aided by technology that had once fueled division. Social media platforms evolved into tools of connection and education, dismantling echo chambers and amplifying voices calling for equity. People began to see the world not as a collection of nations competing for resources, but as a single, interdependent community. The fall of tyranny. The rise of authoritarianism peaked in the 2020s, with nations gripped by leaders who wielded fear and violence to maintain control. But their power proved fragile in the face of collective awakening. Peaceful uprisings swept across the globe, led by diverse coalitions of women, youth, and marginalized communities. These movements did not seek vengeance, but reconciliation, guided by a principle that had become a mantra. Hurt people hurt people. Healing begins with us. By 2040, authoritarian regimes had fallen, replaced by councils that prioritized care over conquest. These councils were not composed of politicians, but of healers, educators, artists, scientists, and farmers, those who understood the interconnectedness of all life. Elections were no longer contests of charisma, but ceremonies of trust, where leaders were chosen for their wisdom and empathy. A new economy, the global economy, underwent a radical transformation. The old model of endless growth was replaced by the economy of enough, a system designed to meet the needs of all while regenerating the earth. Land was returned to indigenous stewardship. Corporations were restructured as cooperatives, with workers and communities holding a majority of power. Fossil fuels became relics of the past, replaced by renewable energy sources that powered not just homes and cities, but also vast rewilding projects. The Amazon rainforest, once teetering on the brink of collapse, became a thriving sanctuary again, thanks to the global efforts led by its indigenous caretakers. Education as the heartbeat. Education became humanity's most sacred endeavor. Children were taught not only science and history, but also emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, and the art of listening. They learned about the stars and the soil, about their ancestors and their responsibilities to future generations. School became centers of community healing where intergenerational wisdom was shared and celebrated. The Council of Cousins. By 2050, the Council of Cousins, a global body representing every culture, ecosystem, and species, had replaced the UN. Its members were not heads of state, but caretakers of the earth, chosen for their ability to listen and mediate. Decisions were made by consensus, and with the understanding that the health of one was inseparable from the health of all. Under the council's guidance, borders became less significant. People moved freely, not out of desperation, but in celebration of shared humanity. The concept of citizenship expanded to include not just humans, but all beings recognized that rivers, forests, and animals had rights too. A flawed but flourishing humanity. Humanity remained imperfect, prone to mistakes, misunderstandings, and moments of selfishness. But the shift towards equity and the care created a foundation of resilience. Conflicts were no longer escalated into wars, but addressed through dialogues and restoration. The arts flourished, offering new ways of imagining and relating. Communities became places of mutual aid and joy where no one was left behind. The universe conspires for good. In quiet moments, as people watched the sun rise over restored landscapes or gathered to celebrate a harvest, there was a shared sense of wonder. The universe, it seemed, had conspired for good, but not by magic, but through the choices humanity had made, choices to trust, to care, to heal, and to hope. The great turning was not a miracle. It was the result of countless acts of courage and compassion, of people daring to believe that another world was possible, and then building it together. And so in 2050, humanity stood not as conquerors of the earth, but as its kin, flawed and beautiful, holding hands as they walked into an uncertain and hopeful future. I know a lot of that is corny, and it doesn't leave for snarky bullshit that we sometimes need to do in order to blow off steam. But I don't know, call me like Pollyanna. Maybe it's this whole mixed breed of me. But okay, there are people who are out there for absolute selfish bad, beyond imagining. But the majority of us want safety for everyone, and we want for everyone to flourish and everyone to be healthy and strong. Anyway, so as corny as that story is, maybe it brings some sense of peace. Okay, I promise snarky bullshit coming up in the season ahead. My usual cursing and talking about sex. But until then, treat everyone as your cousin. Flawed, messy, imperfect. And let me know what you think.